My name is Jonathan Rusk. In the fall of 1929, I was working as a feature writer for a Boston-based science journal. Life back then was full of facts and formulas, neatly boxed explanations for a world that seemed predictable. But all of that changed with one phone call. An old friend, now an engineer at Westinghouse, invited me to New York. "You'll want to hear this," he said, "and bring a notebook." He wouldn't say more over the line, only that I'd be meeting someone important, someone who had stopped giving interviews years ago. I boarded the overnight train with a sense of skepticism mixed with curiosity. I had no idea I was about to enter a story so strange, so deeply unsettling that I'd hide it for nearly a century. When I arrived, I was led, without any formal greeting, to the top floor of the Waldorf Astoria. The room was dark, illuminated only by moonlight slipping through the curtains. I could see a silhouette standing by the window. The man didn't turn. He spoke first. "You're not here to ask questions," he said quietly. "You're here to remember." I froze. That voice, measured, calm, otherworldly, already knew who I was and why I'd come. And in that moment, the weight of reality began to bend. I didn't know it yet, but the man before me was Nikola Tesla. And the story he was about to share would undo everything I believed about life, death, and what waits beyond. He stood at the window, motionless, as if time had forgotten him. The moonlight painted him in silver and shadow, and for a long moment, he said nothing. I stayed by the doorway, uncertain whether to speak or step closer. The room was quiet, unnaturally so. No ticking clock, no city noise, just the steady hum of silence. Then he spoke. "You came because something inside you is restless," he said, still facing the window. "Because numbers and facts have begun to feel hollow." His voice was low, steady. It wasn't a greeting. It was a diagnosis. I cleared my throat. "You're Nikola Tesla." Now he turned. His face was lined but alive, his gaze piercing. There was something strange in the way he looked at me. Not like a man meeting another, but like a mirror looking back. I felt exposed. He nodded slowly, then gestured to a chair near him. "I've stopped giving interviews. Not because I'm tired of questions, but because the answers no longer fit in the world, you know." I sat, notebook trembling in my hands. "Then why me?" He smiled faintly. "Because you'll listen." Then, as if brushing aside centuries of silence, he said, "They think I'm a man of machines, but electricity was never my obsession. It was a door. Tonight, I'll open it." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Something in the room shifted. The air grew heavier, like it remembered things we had forgotten. Tesla leaned in. "What you call death is a pause, a change in tone. And what I'm about to show you will change how you hear everything that follows." Tesla placed both hands on the small glowing orb that sat between us. It pulsed faintly, not with light, but with something deeper, like a heartbeat. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. Then he spoke. "The body is not a prison," he said. "It is a lens, and sometimes the focus slips." I leaned in, unsure of what he meant. "Years ago, during an experiment with rotating magnetic fields, something unexpected happened," he continued. "The energy in the lab intensified beyond prediction. It was as if space itself folded. And in that instant," he paused, eyes narrowing, "I left." "Left?" I asked. "My body." I watched myself from above. I saw the room, the machines, my assistants panicking, but I was free. Not dreaming, not hallucinating. I could see down the hall into the street outside. And later, everything I saw, every detail, was confirmed. He turned his gaze to me. That was not imagination. That was consciousness detached from matter. If it can happen in life, it can happen in death. I felt the hair on my arms rise. Tesla stood and walked to the window. What we call the soul is not myth. It's vibration, light operating beyond the visible spectrum. And science, I asked, does it support this? He smiled. Science is still blind, but the cracks are forming. The light is seeping through. There was a silence between us then, but it wasn't empty. It was full, dense with a truth too large for words. I didn't know it yet, but that moment had changed me. Because deep down, something in me had always known. Tesla remained by the window, fingers tracing invisible lines across the glass. His posture was calm, but his eyes, those intense, searching eyes, had grown darker, as if peering beyond what I could see. "Tell me," he said suddenly, "have you ever walked into a room and felt something before you even saw anything? A heaviness, a sorrow, a warmth?" I nodded. "Yes, often. Old houses, hospitals, sometimes churches." He turned back to me. "That is no accident. What you felt was residue, emotional sediment left behind by those who passed through." "Like ghosts?" "Not quite. More like fingerprints," he explained. "You see, emotions are energy, and energy leaves a mark. The walls remember, the air holds echoes. Matter, in its own quiet way, listens." I wrote furiously, but Tesla's voice slowed. "I once conducted an experiment in a small, isolated chamber," he said. "I had 2 rooms, identical in every way. One had been the site of deep grief, the other untouched. Subjects who entered the first room without any knowledge reported unease, anxiety, sadness. The other, nothing, perfect calm." He looked at the sphere again. "What we feel is not always our own. Sometimes we inherit it. The universe records I was quiet, absorbing it. The idea was terrifying, and yet strangely comforting." "If space remembers," I whispered, "then nothing is ever truly lost." Tesla nodded slowly. "Correct. And that is the second truth. We leave more behind than bones. We leave traces, shadows, vibrations, a map of who we were, written into the walls of the world." The night deepened, but time no longer moved in the room. It felt suspended, as if each word Tesla spoke wove a web that held the air still. He returned to his chair and looked at me, not with the intensity of a scientist, but the softness of someone remembering something sacred. "Do you believe it's possible," he asked, "to feel someone die from across the world?" I hesitated. "Like a sudden chill or a sense of knowing?" He nodded. "Yes. That moment of silence in the heart before news arrives. The dream that lingers before the telegram." I stared at him, goosebumps rising. "It happened to me," he continued. "A friend. We hadn't spoken in years. He was in Europe. At precisely 3:14 in the morning, I collapsed. No warning, no illness. Just gone. When I awoke, I felt a hole in the world." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn letter, unfolded with care. A week later, this arrived, dated the same hour. He'd passed in his sleep. He held my gaze. That was not coincidence. That was a thread. Tesla leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "We are not islands. We are signals connected by a web of frequencies the body cannot comprehend, but the soul never forgets." He tapped the glowing sphere gently. "These connections, they don't end with death. If anything, they strengthen." I said nothing. I felt something move inside me. Not fear, recognition. "Love," he said simply, "is the frequency that never breaks." and it reaches farther than you think. Tesla rose again, this time moving to a covered table in the corner of the room. With a deliberate hand, he removed the cloth, revealing a strange device, part antenna, part sculpture. Thin metallic arms curved outward like petals, delicate and precise. In the center, a small coil pulsed softly. "This," he said, "is not a machine. It is an ear." I blinked. "An ear?" He smiled faintly. "Not for hearing sound, but for sensing the music left behind when a soul departs." He walked around it slowly. Every living being emits a frequency, a unique resonance, a symphony of memory, thought, emotion. When the body dies, that music doesn't stop. It lingers, faint, fragile, but still there. He touched the coil. "I've spent years trying to capture it, not as noise, but as sensation. The feeling that someone is nearby, even when they are not." I leaned closer. "Have you recorded anything?" Tesla looked up, his face strangely solemn. "Yes, not voices, not words, but presence, as if something invisible brushed past, the pulse of an identity trying to be remembered." He turned off the device, and the room fell silent again. "We're taught to believe that death is silence," he said, "but the soul doesn't fall quiet. It changes key." I felt a chill, not of fear, but awe. "And that," Tesla concluded, "is the fourth truth. The dead do not disappear. They resonate. And if you listen, not with ears, but with a heart, you'll hear them still." Tesla returned to his chair, slower now, as if each truth carried its own weight. He looked out the window again, the city still glowing far below, unaware of the revelation blooming in this quiet room. "There's one more," he said, voice low. "The last proof." He didn't touch the glowing sphere this time. He simply folded his hands as if holding something delicate. "Dream," he began, "are not always inventions of the mind. Sometimes they're memories slipping through cracks in reality, or messages passed across dimensions." I felt the room grow colder. 3 people, he continued, in 3 different countries, each wrote to me about a dream. In it, they saw a woman, same face, same dress, same words. None of them had met. None knew each other. But the dreams arrived on the same night. I swallowed hard. And the woman? She had died months before, but she had loved them all, each in a different life. And they had loved her. He turned to me. "Love does not recognize borders, nor time, nor death." That dream was not a coincidence. It was a reunion. I sat frozen, unable to look away. "Death," Tesla said, "is not silence. It is a different channel. And sometimes, when the veil thins, those who listen closely enough feel the signal." He leaned forward. "That is the 5th truth. Sometimes we meet in dreams, not as fantasy, but as communion. And in those moments, death itself becomes irrelevant." Tesla rose without a word and walked to a tall, narrow cabinet tucked into the shadowed corner of the room. The lock clicked softly as he opened it, revealing what looked like a velvet-lined compartment. He reached inside and lifted out a small cylindrical object, metallic, etched with strange symbols, and no longer than a wine bottle. He held it gently, like it was alive. "I call it the echo catcher," he said. "It doesn't record sound, it records presence." I leaned forward, breath caught. "It was built to capture the energetic imprint of consciousness at the precise moment it leaves the body," Tesla continued. "Not a voice, not an image, just thought, essence, a resonance." He placed it on the table between us. Even untouched, it seemed to hum, like a vibration just beyond hearing. "I tested it twice," he said. "Both times I received something. a phrase, not from the living. He looked me straight in the eyes. One message simply said, "I am still here. Help me remember." The hair on my arm stood up. "Who was it, Tati?" I asked. Tesla paused. "I don't know, but it felt familiar, as if I were speaking with someone I once was or someone I might become." I swallowed. "Why haven't you revealed this?" He exhaled slowly. "Because they would destroy it, as they destroyed everything that threatens control. If people knew death wasn't the end, fear would vanish. And without fear, they, the ones who rule through it, would lose everything." He gently pushed the cylinder toward me. "You must keep it safe," he said. "And when the time is right, pass it on." The device sat between us like a silent witness. I didn't dare touch it yet. Tesla leaned back, his eyes distant, no longer speaking to me, but to something beyond the walls of the room. "I've hidden too much," he said quietly. "For too long. There were others like me, scientists, thinkers, dreamers, but most stayed silent. Some out of fear, some out of humility." He looked down, hands folded. "Truth is like fire. It warms, but it can also burn, and the world wasn't ready to be burned." I sat still, not knowing whether to speak. "I almost shared it once," he said. "In Colorado, during electron resonance. I was about to reveal the invisible threads that bind souls when an official stepped in, shut it down, called it dangerous metaphysics." He smiled bitterly. "Since then, I've stayed silent. Until now." I found my voice. "Why now?" "Because the clock is ticking," he said, eyes locking with mine. "Because I know the time is near. Somewhere out there, someone will hear this and feel something stir deep inside. That stirring is remembrance." He stood slower than before, but taller somehow, stronger. "This isn't just a story," he said. "It's a seed, and if it lands in fertile soil, it will grow, not in all, but in those ready to awaken." I rose too, my heart pounding. "Well, one last question," I asked, barely above a whisper. "Mr. Tesla, who are we?" He didn't hesitate. "We are light that is forgotten." I left Tesla's suite just before dawn. The hallway outside felt ordinary, carpeted, dimly lit, lined with silent doors. But I was no longer the same. Something within me had shifted. Not because I had seen a machine or heard a theory, but because I had felt something awaken. In my pocket was the echo catcher. In my chest, a storm of questions. But deeper than that, a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. A strange, quiet knowing that life wasn't a line with a period, but a spiral with no end. For decades, I said nothing. I kept the notes locked away, the device hidden. I watched the world race forward, louder, faster, colder. And yet, part of me waited for a sign, for someone who might understand. Now, as my hands grow older and time grows thin, I sense the stirring Tesla spoke of. People are beginning to question, to feel again, to remember. That's why I'm telling you this now. Because if you are reading these words, perhaps you are one of them. Perhaps you've lost someone or felt something you couldn't explain. Perhaps you've dreamed of a voice long gone, or heard silence that wasn't empty. If so, you're not alone. The light hasn't left us. It was simply buried beneath noise, fear, and forgetting. But it's returning, slowly, surely. We are not just flesh and endings. We are light, learning how to shine again.